Intro. Chapter: The Grit Behind the Glamour. In the land of Hollywood, where stars shimmered like distant constellations, some shone brighter than others, standing apart in ways that couldn't simply be explained by fame or beauty. These actors were more than just cinematic figures. They were forces of nature, cloaked not just in the glittering spotlight of Tinseltown, but in something darker, something far more enduring. These were the legends who did not merely capture the hearts of millions, but commanded the respect, and often fear, of the very directors who sought to control their every move on set. They were known not only for their screen presence, but for the raw, untamed energy they brought to every scene, a rawness that left an indelible imprint on the industry and its audience. The glare of Hollywood was not kind to everyone, yet some thrived under its intensity. These actors were not just the ones who played characters, they became them, with an intensity and dedication that left no room for anything less than complete immersion. They didn't just step into roles, they consumed them. The directors trembled, the co-stars marveled, and the audiences watched in awe as these titans brought every character to life with an authenticity that bled through the screen, leaving a mark far beyond the fictional worlds they inhabited. But behind the bravado, behind the meticulously crafted image of the tough, indomitable screen legends, was another reality. Beneath the polished, glittering exterior lay a world of complexity, one of silent battles and inner demons. Battles fought not only in front of the camera, but in their private lives, away from the prying eyes of the public. Their strength was visible, undeniable, and celebrated, but it was often the vulnerability they hid that told the true story. The moments of weakness, the emotional scars, the cracks in their seemingly impenetrable facades. These were the parts of their stories that rarely made it into the limelight. In this documentary, we will delve into the world of these 5 legendary actors, stepping beyond the glamour of their public personas to uncover the raw, human side of their lives. Their legacies, though immortalized in film, are far more than just iconic performances. They are stories of men and women who lived through and with the roles they played, roles that often mirrored the struggles they fought in real life. The glamour of the red carpet, the sound of applause from audiences, and the flashing lights of the cameras were all there, but they often came at a great cost. We will explore the contrast between the figures the world adored and the lives they led behind closed doors. What the public saw was often a carefully curated image, the stoic, tough persona that became inseparable from their on-screen characters. But what lay beneath? What toll did it take to embody that kind of strength, that kind of indomitable will, time and time again? Behind the scenes, these stars battled their own personal demons, wrestled with the weight of fame, and often struggled to reconcile the men and women they were with the larger-than-life figures the world demanded them to be. Each of these stories, stories of triumph, loss, and quiet resilience, reveals a part of their legacy that cannot and will not be erased. These stars once ruled the screen, filling theaters and living rooms with their brilliance, and yet their stories are far from finished. They remain present in the corners of Hollywood's hallways, in the whispered recollections of those who witnessed their greatness and their pain. But as time marches on and the glitz of Hollywood fades into the distant past, their true stories remain, the grit behind the glamour, forever intertwined with the myth. These 5 icons will forever be remembered, not for their unshakable toughness, but for the humanity they displayed, a humanity that even the most dazzling performances could never fully conceal. They may have been larger-than-life figures on screen, but it was the struggle within their hearts, away from the spotlight, that shaped the essence of who they truly were. The world saw their strength. Now, we turn the spotlight on their struggle, the invisible weight of their legacies, as we explore the untold truths of their lives. Marlon Brando was more than just a great actor. He was a force of nature, a magnetic presence that seemed to transcend the very space he occupied. His name alone could command a room, but his spirit was something altogether different, untamed, wild, impossible to ignore. In The Godfather, Brando became the iconic Vito Corleone, a role that not only captured the essence of power and respect, but also revealed a vulnerability beneath the hardened exterior. But the man who played Corleone was not merely a character. He was a man whose very presence reshaped the atmosphere around him. Brando was a rebel in every sense of the word. He rejected convention, not only in his roles, but in his very approach to the craft of acting. He didn't want to be molded by the Hollywood machine. No, Brando wanted to carve out his own path, one that was as unpredictable as the characters he brought to life. The tension between his brilliance and his refusal to conform created friction, not just on set, but in his personal life too. He was a man who lived for authenticity, even when it meant clashing with directors, producers, and the very system that had made him a star. But beneath that fierce exterior lay a different story. Marlon Brando was a deeply lonely man, someone who struggled with the weight of his fame, his wealth, and his own insecurities. He was a man who, despite his immense success, never felt like he truly belonged. The roles he took on, powerful, dominating, and sometimes heartless, were not the roles that defined him as a person. They were masks, carefully constructed to shield him from a world that often seemed indifferent to his pain. Brando carried a profound sadness, a sadness that could never be filled by an Oscar or the adoration of millions. Brando's battles weren't just with directors or the system, they were with himself. His greatest role, perhaps, wasn't in front of the camera, but in the quiet, intimate moments where he faced the conflict between the man he was and the man the world expected him to be. The magic of Marlon Brando wasn't in the characters he played, but in the vulnerability he hid so deeply. A vulnerability that, when revealed, made his performances even more powerful, even more real. In the end, the role made him famous, but it also broke him. His name stayed on posters, etched into the fabric of film history, but not on the lips of those he truly loved. And in that silence, the world never truly knew the man behind the icon. He wore tuxedos on screen. In real life, he wore guilt. James Dean is forever immortalized as the emblem of teenage rebellion. His screen presence was raw, untamed, and unsettling in the way it captured the discomfort of youth, the confusion of identity, and the longing for something greater than the world offered. He became the symbol of the restless soul, the youth who could not conform to societal expectations. In Rebel Without a Cause, Dean played a troubled teenager searching for something he couldn't name, a feeling that resonated with anyone who had ever felt out of place. His performance was electric, both heartbreaking and stirring. It was the kind of role that you couldn't forget, a role that seemed to come from a place deep within him, a place of anger and yearning. But the irony of James Dean's life was that, despite becoming the ultimate symbol of rebellion, he never had the chance to fully rebel against the very system that created him. Dean's rebellion wasn't an act of defiance against Hollywood. It was his attempt to break free from a world that could never truly understand him. Fame came too quickly, and with it, the realization that the more he distanced himself from the public's expectations, the more he was trapped by them. He became a character, a symbol, and in doing so, he lost the chance to truly be himself. James Dean died at the tender age of 24, and in doing so, he became the eternal tragic figure, a boy who never had the chance to grow into the man he might have been. His death solidified his place in history, a tragic icon whose legacy would forever be tied to the ideals of youth, rebellion, and heartbreak. Yet, for all his brilliance and pain, there was something poignant in his short life. Dean never had the chance to fully live. He was forever caught between the roles he played and the man he couldn't become. The audience believed the kiss, but he'd already fallen out of love with the world. He smiled for the camera and cried when it turned away. Clark Gable was Hollywood royalty, a man whose very name became synonymous with charm, masculinity, and strength. In Gone with the Wind, Gable became Rhett Butler, a character who exuded power and allure, a man who seemed to have it all: wealth, beauty, love, and the adoration of millions. His on-screen persona was untouchable, a force that dominated the screen. Yet, beneath the polished surface of the man who made women swoon and men want to be him, was something far more fragile. Gable's early life was marked by hardship. He was not born into privilege, but had to work hard to make his name in Hollywood. His success came after years of struggle, but the ghost of his past never left him. Even at the height of his fame, Gable was haunted by loss, personal loss, the kind that reshapes a person's soul. His tragic love story with Carole Lombard, the love of his life, was a poignant reminder of just how fragile even the greatest of Hollywood's stars could be. Lombard's untimely death shattered him, and the man who had once been a symbol of strength was left adrift, trying to navigate a world without the woman who had meant everything to him. Despite his towering persona, Gable was a man who bore his grief in silence. There was no grand public display of emotion, no dramatic outpouring of pain. Instead, he wore his sadness quietly, a king who wept alone in the shadows of his own fame. The world may have seen him as the ultimate leading man, but the truth was far more complicated. Gable was a man who lived with the weight of loss and longing, a man who carried his private wounds in silence, even when the cameras stopped rolling. The role made him famous, but it also broke him. No one dared ask. He never told, until it was too late. Humphrey Bogart was the embodiment of the tough guy detective. He was the face of film noir, the man who could deliver a line with such grit and resolve that it seemed like he could never be broken. His characters were cynical, sharp, and always in control, the kind of man who walked through darkness and came out unscathed. But the truth about Bogart was that, beneath the surface of his tough exterior, there was a man who was far from invulnerable. He was haunted by his own darkness, by the self-doubt that seemed to follow him wherever he went. His relationship with Lauren Bacall was a bright spot in his life, a love story that filled the pages of Hollywood lore. But even in his greatest happiness, there was an undercurrent of tragedy. Bogart's life was a series of struggles, personal demons that seemed to chase him even in the most glamorous settings. His tough guy persona was more than just a character on screen. It was a survival mechanism. It was his way of shielding himself from the chaos of his own mind, from the insecurities that plagued him, from the sense that he was never quite good enough, even when the world adored him. For all his bravado, Bogart was searching for peace, a peace that always seemed just out of reach. He outlasted his own darkness, but the cost was high. The man who wore the sharp suit and delivered the perfect line was also a man who, in the quiet moments, carried the weight of a broken soul. His toughness was not just an act. It was the only way he knew how to survive in a world that never allowed him to be anything but strong. He wore tuxedos on screen. In real life, he wore guilt. He smiled for the camera and cried when it turned away. John Wayne was the epitome of American masculinity, a rugged cowboy who became the symbol of strength, courage, and unyielding resolve. He was the man who never flinched, the hero who faced down every obstacle with a quiet determination that spoke volumes. His roles in True Grit and The Searchers made him the face of Hollywood's golden age, and the world saw him as the ultimate hero, a man who stood tall against the backdrop of a country that mirrored his hard-edged persona. But the man behind the cowboy image was not the same man the world saw on screen. John Wayne's personal life was a far cry from the unflinching hero he played on screen. He wore his armor both on and off the set, never allowing anyone to see the cracks beneath the surface. His relationships were strained by his stoicism, by his refusal to show vulnerability. The man who could take on the world with a single glance was, in reality, just a man who carried the weight of personal loss, health battles, and a longing for a simpler life that he could never quite find. Wayne's legacy is a paradox. He was the tough, indomitable cowboy on screen, but off-screen, he was just a man who longed to set down his armor, even if just for a moment. The role made him famous, but it also broke him. His name stayed on posters, but not on the lips of those he loved. The audience believed the kiss, but he'd already fallen out of love with everything it represented. Outro chapter: The Echoes of Toughness, the Cost of Being a Legend. As the final curtain falls on these cinematic legends, we are left with the echoes of their stories. Stories that are both triumphant and tragic. Stories that show us that the greatest toughness often comes at a profound personal cost. These stars, who stood at the pinnacle of Hollywood's golden age, were more than just icons of strength. They were complex, fragile people, each carrying their own burdens, their own secrets, their own struggles. Hollywood's toughest actors were not just symbols of unyielding masculinity or heroism. They were men and women who faced the same fears and doubts that we all carry. They were human, just like the rest of us, but their humanity was often obscured by the larger-than-life roles they played. Their toughness was not a product of invulnerability. It was a shield, a way of protecting themselves from a world that demanded more than they could give. These actors gave everything to the world, but they paid a heavy price for their art. They wore the armor of strength, but underneath, they bled just like the rest of us. And in the end, the most painful irony was that the world would remember them not for their moments of weakness, but for the toughness they so carefully projected. Yet, their stories remind us that even the strongest, most indomitable figures are allowed moments of fragility, that even the brightest stars can be eclipsed by their own shadows. In the quiet moments between their roles, in the spaces between the lights and the cameras, these actors revealed the truth, a truth that even time cannot erase. Their stories live on, not just as legends, but as reminders of the cost of greatness,